In prior sessions, we discussed the demand for labor, and the decision rule for a single input problem is the marginal revenue product equals marginal resource cost. Does the worker pay for himself? Can he contribute more revenue than the additional cost in being hired? And we derive the demand curve from the firm. So if the wage rate's $14, they'll hire one worker. If the wage rate falls to $12, they'll hire two workers. $10, three workers, because they're paying for themselves. And this is changing because of the principle of diminishing marginal returns. When we graph the quantity of the resource with the marginal revenue product, we have the demand curve for labor. So the demand curve for labor is the marginal revenue product. The change in total revenue divided by the change in the amount of resources. When wage rates change, you move up and down the demand curve. But there are times when the demand for a resource will shift, either decreasing, moving to the left, or increasing, moving to the right. These changes in the shifts in demand occur because of changes in product demand, changes in productivity of resources, changes in the price of other resources. Okay. So let's begin by talking about changes in product demand. Remember from our first video on resource demand that the demand for a resource is derived from the demand for the product. So if people don't demand cars made in Detroit, the demand for auto workers in Detroit goes down. If the demand for cars made in Ohio goes up, then the demand for labor for work cars goes up in Ohio. So when the demand for the product rises, so will the demand for the resource. Changes in productivity will cause a shift in the demand for a resource. This affects the quantities of other resources that are used in production, the technology of other resources that are used with a particular resource, or the quality of the resource itself. So the demand for labor may be one amount, but if we add capital to the labor, and that labor then, because of the additional capital, becomes more productive, then the demand for labor will go up, because costs will fall and profits will rise. So when you combine a resource with another resource, resulting in synergy, when the output will go up as a result, the productivity goes up, then the demand for the input will also go up. Once you have that level of production, combining capital and labor, if all of a sudden the capital becomes more productive, you'll see an increase in demand for the other input that's used with the capital that can operate that capital. An example in the text is for this one is technological improvements that increase the quality of the other resource have the same effect. So if you hire better equipment, then the demand for the resource that operates that equipment will go up. It's a shift in the demand. The better the quality of capital, the greater productivity of labor used with it. Dock workers employed with cranes are more productive than dock workers using the same amount of real capital in the old conveyor belt method. So the demand for people who operate cranes, dock workers can operate cranes, will go up. Things that shift the demand for a resource. Combining it with capital, combining it with better capital. Improving the productivity of the resource itself. Perhaps many of you here to improve your productivity and increase the demand for your resource. So if you take an input and make it more productive, perhaps with more education, the demand for that resource will increase. In effect, really though, what you've done is you've created another market for that new quality of resource. You're not really holding the quality of the resource constant. Here, you're holding the quality of the input, the labor resource constant. Here, you're not. So, but it will shift the demand for a resource if you make it more productive, perhaps through training a resource. So now I'm talking about wage changes here, causing a movement up and down a single demand curve, the marginal revenue product. We're talking about changes in the demand for it, which will shift this curve, causing these numbers to change, causing a different amount of hiring at those different marginal revenue products. The changes in the price of other resources will also cause a change in the demand for a resource that's used along with those other resources. In this example, we use capital and labor. There's something called the substitution effect, the input effect, and the net effect when we talk about the changes in the price of one resource and the demand for another resource, like the change in the price of capital and the change in the demand for labor. If capital falls in price, then businesses will attempt to use more of it. The demand for capital may go up, and the demand for labor used along with it will go down as businesses try to use more capital and less labor. Actually, that's a change in the quantity demand of labor, capital. As the price of capital falls, businesses will use more capital. They'll try to substitute away and use less labor, right? You've seen the kiosks at McDonald's and maybe some other retail stores that as the capital becomes more cost effective, they'll use less counter help. That's the substitution effect. But there could be an input effect. Because costs are going down, because capital costs less, and profits are going up, it may be that the business is so much more profitable that they will use more labor as well. And that's the input effect. So they're using some ratio that's variable between capital and labor, and they're substituting away from labor to use more capital, but the business is so much more profitable, the business expands so much they actually have to have more labor as well, and that's the input effect. The net effect is which one is larger, the input or substitution effect. If the input effect outweighs the substitution effect, then the demand for labor will go up overall, even though the business is trying to use more capital as a ratio than labor. If the business is so much more productive, their output goes up so much they'll need more labor as well. But if the substitution effect outweighs the input effect, then they're substituting capital at a greater rate than they're using more labor, and the overall effect on the demand for labor will be to fall. The last thing that causes a shift in the demand for a resource, like labor, not a change in the wage rate, but an actual shift in the demand for labor, is complementary goods. Here, let's say the ratio of machines and workers is at a fixed rate, 1-to-1. If the price of a machine that a worker uses goes down, then the company is more productive, profits go up. They'll hire more machines, and since they're using, in this example, machines at a fixed rate with labor, then the demand for labor will also go up. Complementary resources, two resources that have to be used together. The demand for one goes up, the demand for the other goes up. Okay, well this again would be the cost going down for this one, and the demand for labor going up. So these are things that shift the demand for labor, as opposed to riding on one line, one demand line, because of changes in wage rate. In our next video, we're going to talk about the elasticity of demand for labor. How steep are these curves? How much can the quantity demanded of labor change given a change in the wage rate?